The rain wouldn't stop falling. It felt deliberate, heavy, unforgiving. The kind of rain that presses into your shoulders and makes breathing feel heavier than it should. I stood beneath a black umbrella at my wife's graveside, listening to words I barely registered. 32 years of marriage reduced to a eulogy delivered by a man who had known her for 12. Friends whispered condolences. Distant relatives avoided eye contact. My daughter held my arm as if I might collapse, but I felt strangely upright. Hollow, yes, but upright. When the final prayer ended and people began drifting toward their cars, I stayed. I watched as the workers prepared to lower the casket. I memorized the sound of the ropes tightening. That was when I felt someone standing behind me, not close enough to touch, close enough to be intentional. I turned slowly. He wasn't dressed like family. No black tie, no somber expression, just a gray coat and steady eyes. Mid-40s, perhaps, calm in a way that didn't fit the setting. "Mr. Lawson?" he asked quietly. I nodded. He extended a small black USB drive toward me. "She wanted you to have this." The words felt misplaced. "Who?" I asked, though I knew. "Your wife." My chest tightened. "I don't know you." He didn't argue. "You don't need to. Watch it alone." Alone. That word landed heavier than the rain. I hesitated before taking it. The device was ordinary. No markings. No explanation. "When did she give this to you?" I asked. 3 months ago, he replied. 3 months. That was before the hospital visits became routine, before the diagnosis worsened, before she began insisting I rest more often. My mind started connecting timelines I hadn't questioned before. Why not give it to me earlier? I pressed. His expression didn't change. She said timing matters. Then he stepped back, not hurried, not nervous, just finished. I watched him walk toward the far end of the cemetery parking lot. No one stopped him. No one seemed to notice him at all. My daughter returned to my side. "Dad, we should go," she said softly. I slipped the USB into my coat pocket without explanation. In a minute, I replied. The drive felt heavier than metal should. At home, the silence was different. The house no longer felt like ours. It felt paused. My daughter offered to stay the night. I told her I needed to be alone. She hesitated, then left reluctantly. I waited until the headlights disappeared down the street before locking the door. I stood in my study for a long time before removing the USB from my pocket. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I turned on the desk lamp, inserted the drive into my laptop, and waited. One file appeared. A single video labeled simply, "For Daniel." My throat tightened. I clicked it. The screen flickered. Then her face appeared. She was sitting at our kitchen table, the same blue sweater she wore on quiet Sunday mornings. Her hair looked thinner than I remembered, but her eyes were clear, focused. "If you're watching this," she began, her voice calm, "then I didn't get the chance to explain everything." My pulse quickened. She looked directly into the camera. "You need to listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you isn't about my illness." The air in the room felt thinner. "It's about what they've been doing behind your back." I leaned closer to the screen. Outside, the rain continued tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. She took a slow breath before continuing. "And you need to promise me one thing, Daniel." Her voice lowered slightly. "Do not trust anyone until you finish this video." I didn't blink. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Her face filled the screen, steady and composed in a way that unsettled me more than tears ever could. "You're going to want to stop this," she said softly. "Don't." I swallowed. My hand hovered near the keyboard but didn't touch it. She adjusted the camera slightly, as if ensuring the frame was clear. 3 months ago, I overheard something I wasn't supposed to hear. My pulse began to thud in my ears. "It started with paperwork," she continued. "Documents I never signed. Authorizations I never approved." My mind raced backward. Hospital visits. Insurance forms. Financial discussions I assumed were routine. "Daniel," she said gently, "someone's been moving money." The words felt unreal. Not small amounts. Large transfers. Structured carefully. My chest tightened. and they used my medical status to justify access. I leaned back slowly, trying to absorb it. I didn't understand at first, she admitted. I thought it was administrative confusion. Her expression hardened slightly. It wasn't. She turned slightly to her left, and I noticed a stack of folders on the table beside her. I hired someone, she said quietly. Someone discreet. My thoughts flashed to the man at the cemetery. The gray coat, the calm eyes. He traced the transfers, she continued. He found shell accounts, redirected dividends, adjusted beneficiary designations. My breathing grew shallow. Beneficiary designations. We had updated those 5 years ago. Together. Daniel, she said, and her voice softened. They assumed I was too sick to notice. My stomach dropped. They? I whispered to the empty room. On the screen, she nodded slightly as if hearing the question. Yes, they. She paused, letting the word hang. I didn't confront anyone. I needed proof. She opened one of the folders and lifted a document toward the camera. The image wasn't perfectly clear, but I recognized the bank's letterhead instantly. This transfer, she said, tapping the page, was executed 2 weeks after my diagnosis. My mind snapped to memory. That was the week our daughter insisted on handling more errands. The week, she said. I looked exhausted. It was authorized using my digital signature. My wife said, a signature I did not provide. My throat tightened painfully. She lowered the document. I checked the account logs. Access came from inside this house. My heart pounded harder. Daniel, she whispered, you need to check the secondary investment account, the one we never discussed publicly, the Oregon Trust Fund, the emergency reserve. Only 3 people knew about it. My wife, me, and I stopped the thought. I wanted to tell you sooner, she continued, but I wasn't sure how deep it went. She glanced toward the window, as if expecting someone to appear. They think you don't review statements anymore. That part hit differently. She had noticed my withdrawal during her illness, the way I avoided financial conversations because they felt trivial compared to hospital rooms. I recorded copies, she said firmly. Everything is on this drive. My eyes darted to the file directory. Only one visible file showed, but she must have hidden others. Daniel, she said, leaning closer to the camera, if something happens to me sooner than expected, you must verify every account. Start with the investment firm downtown. My chest tightened again. And do not confront anyone without documentation. She exhaled slowly. I don't know who initiated it, but I know who benefits. My stomach turned cold. If I'm wrong, she said quietly, then forgive me. Her eyes glistened slightly. But if I'm right, she paused. The rain outside intensified, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. Then someone close to us has been preparing for my absence. The screen flickered briefly as if the recording had glitched. When it stabilized, her expression had changed. Not fearful, determined. Daniel, she said one last time, promise me you won't assume innocence just because it hurts to question it. The video cut abruptly. The screen went black. I stared at my reflection in the monitor. My hands were trembling now, not from grief, from realization. Someone had been preparing, and I suddenly understood why the stranger had waited until after the funeral. Timing mattered, and whatever this was, it had already begun. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. I sat in my office with the USB drive still plugged into my computer, replaying her words over and over until they felt carved into my skull. Access came from inside this house. That sentence refused to leave me alone. By sunrise, I had made a decision. I would not confront anyone. Not yet. I would follow her instructions exactly. Documentation first. Emotion later. At 8:03 a.m., I logged into our primary investment portal. My fingers felt stiff, almost disconnected from my body. Username. Password. 2-factor authentication. The dashboard loaded slowly, the spinning icon mocking my impatience. Everything looked normal at first glance. Portfolio balance steady. Dividend reinvestments consistent. But she hadn't said the primary account. She said the secondary one, the one we never discussed publicly. That account required a separate login. different credentials, different security questions. I hadn't accessed it in over a year. When the screen finally opened, I immediately noticed something subtle. The interface looked updated, recently modified. I scanned the transaction history. There, 3 transfers, not large enough to trigger automatic alerts. Structured carefully, exactly as she had described. The dates matched the timeline she mentioned. 2 weeks after her diagnosis, 1 month after, and again 3 months ago. Each transfer moved funds into an external holding account labeled under a corporate trust name I didn't recognize. My heartbeat slowed, not from calm, but from shock settling in. She hadn't imagined it. I opened the access log. IP addresses, device signatures, login timestamps. The first 2 logins came from our home network. The third came from a laptop device ID I didn't recognize. But the location? Still within our zip code. Not overseas. Not offshore. Close. Very close. My phone buzzed. A text message from my daughter. Asterisk Dad, checking in. How are you holding up this morning? Asterisk. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back. Asterisk managing. Thank you. Asterisk. My hands felt cold. I opened the hidden folders on the USB drive. She had encrypted them, but she had left a password in a file titled Anniversary. I typed our wedding date. The folder unlocked. Inside were scanned statements, screenshots of login sessions, and a detailed timeline she had assembled. My wife had built a case quietly while fighting an illness that was slowly draining her strength. And then I saw something that made my stomach twist. A notarized document draft. Power of attorney. Dated, but not finalized. My wife had written a note beside it in her handwriting. Asterisk, attempted revision. I declined. Asterisk. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of everything pressing against my ribs. Someone had attempted to shift legal authority while she was vulnerable. Someone she trusted enough to allow into our private paperwork. At 10:17 a.m., I called an investment firm downtown. I requested a meeting with the senior compliance officer. I didn't explain much. I simply said I needed to review account activity in person. My voice sounded steady, surprisingly steady. When I arrived at the firm, the receptionist offered condolences. I nodded politely. I was ushered into a glass-walled office overlooking the city. The compliance officer, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, pulled up the account history on her screen. These transfers were authorized digitally, she said carefully. The signature matches the registered biometric profile. It wasn't her, I said quietly. She looked at me more closely then. Are you alleging fraud? I'm alleging manipulation, I replied, and I have documentation. I handed her the printed copies from the USB drive. She flipped through them slowly. Her expression shifted from professional neutrality to concern. We'll initiate an internal audit, she said. Immediately. Discreetly, I added. She nodded once. When I left the building, the air outside felt heavier. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my son. Asterisk Dad, a few of us are coming by tonight, just to sit with you. You shouldn't be alone. Asterisk. A few of us. The wording lingered in my mind. I typed back. Asterisk, of course. That would be nice. Asterisk. I sat in my car for several minutes before starting the engine. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't even certain. But the pieces were aligning. The transfers, the attempted POA revision, the internal access logs, the subtle financial conversations over the past year, questions about asset distribution, suggestions about simplifying estate planning. Had I ignored warning signs because they came wrapped in concern? When I returned home, the house felt different. Quieter but not peaceful. I walked through each room slowly, noticing details I had overlooked before. The filing cabinet in the study was slightly misaligned. The spare laptop on the desk, missing. I hadn't used it in months. I opened the drawer where we kept our external hard drives. One was gone. The realization hit me clean and sharp. This wasn't random. It wasn't opportunistic. It was planned. And whoever had planned it believed I was too distracted by grief to look closely. Tonight, they were coming over. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt something other than sorrow. I felt ready. They arrived at 7 sharp. Too punctual. Too composed. My son came first. Carrying a bottle of wine I knew I wouldn't drink. My daughter followed. Her expression carefully softened, the kind of sympathy people rehearse in mirrors. Behind them were their spouses, quiet, observant. They filled the living room with low voices and controlled concern, as if grief required choreography. I stood near the fireplace and watched them settle in, memorizing every gesture. "I'm glad you're not alone tonight," my daughter said, placing a hand on my arm. Her touch felt warm, familiar, almost convincing. "I won't be," I replied evenly. We sat. Small talk drifted through the room like smoke. Memories of their mother, stories from childhood, laughter that sounded forced at the edges. I noticed how my son's eyes kept scanning the house. Brief glances toward the study door, toward the hallway leading to the office. He thought I wouldn't see it. But grief sharpened certain instincts. Half an hour passed before my daughter spoke again. "Dad, we've been thinking," she began carefully. "You shouldn't have to deal with all the financial stuff right now. It's overwhelming. We can help." There it was. Gentle, polite, strategic. "I appreciate that," I said. "What exactly do you suggest?" My son leaned forward. "Maybe consolidate accounts. Simplify structures. You and Mom had things layered. It might make sense to streamline everything while we're together." Layered. That was her word. My wife had used that word on the video. I kept my expression neutral. "Interesting timing," I said softly. They exchanged a quick glance. Barely noticeable. But I saw it. "What do you mean?" my daughter asked. I stood and walked to the study. Slow steps. Deliberate. I returned with a small folder. Not the USB. Not yet. Just printed bank statements. I placed them on the coffee table between us. "These transfers," I said calmly. 3 of them. Secondary account. Did either of you want to explain? Silence swallowed the room. My son's jaw tightened. My daughter blinked too quickly. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. Too fast. Digital authorizations. I continued. "Home network IP address. Dates that align with your visits." My son leaned back. Defensive posture. "Dad, are you accusing us of something?" "I'm asking," I replied. My daughter's voice trembled, but not with fear, with calculation. "Mom wasn't well. She might have moved funds and forgotten." I let that sit for 3 full seconds. "She documented everything," I said quietly, "including someone attempting to revise her power of attorney." The word power changed the air. I watched it land. I watched it register. "That's absurd," my son snapped. "Why would we need that?" "To gain access," I answered. "To restructure control." My daughter stood abruptly. "This is unbelievable. We come here to support you and you." "You access her account," I said. Not louder, just firmer. "You underestimated her. And you underestimated me." Her face drained of color, just for a second. Then it returned to practiced indignation. "Dad, you're grieving. You're not thinking clearly." That phrase. It echoed, "not thinking clearly." I felt a flicker of cold understanding. This wasn't just about money. It was about positioning, about narrative, about slowly establishing doubt. "My clarity," I said evenly, "is exactly why I met with compliance this morning." That stopped them. Completely. My son's composure cracked first. "You what?" "Internal audit. Discreet. Ongoing." The room shifted from performance to panic. Subtle but real. My daughter's husband spoke for the first time. "Maybe we should all just calm down." "Yes," I agreed. "That would be wise." I picked up the folder again and closed it slowly. "If there's an explanation," I said, "now would be the appropriate time." They said nothing, not a word. And in that silence, something irreversible settled into place. Not accusation, not anger, confirmation. The silence didn't break. It fractured, slowly, quietly. My daughter sat back down, but her hands were no longer steady. My son avoided my eyes now. The confidence they carried into this house had shifted into something thinner, something fragile. I didn't press them again. I didn't need to. People reveal more when they believe you already know everything. I think this conversation isn't healthy tonight, my daughter finally said, her tone softer but strained. You're under stress. We all are. That's true, I replied. But stress doesn't alter transaction logs. My son exhaled sharply. Dad, listen. The market's unstable. Kyle and I have been exploring investment opportunities. We thought if funds were just sitting there. Just sitting there? I repeated. He hesitated. Mom always said money should work. Not secretly. I said. There it was. The first crack of admission, disguised as justification. They weren't denying access anymore. They were reframing motive. That told me everything. My daughter leaned forward. We weren't stealing. We were reallocating. It was temporary. To an external trust, I said calmly, under a corporate name none of us discussed. She swallowed. It was structured that way for tax efficiency. I almost admired the confidence. Almost. And the attempted power of attorney revision? I asked. That wasn't what you think, she said quickly. We were trying to protect her. You were overwhelmed. If something happened to you too, we needed authority to act. Protect her? By isolating her control? By bypassing transparency? I stood again, this time retrieving the USB drive from the study. I walked back and placed it gently on the coffee table between us. No drama, no raised voice, just quiet certainty. She anticipated this, I said, every move. Their expressions shifted instantly. Real fear now, not performance. She left the video. I continued, explaining the unauthorized logins, the document drafts, the pattern. My son's lips parted slightly. You watched it? Yes. My daughter's composure collapsed in small increments. Dad, she was sick. She wasn't thinking clearly. She was thinking more clearly than anyone in this room, I said. The words weren't loud, but they landed like impact. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my daughter's husband tried again. Maybe this can be resolved internally. There's no need to escalate. Escalate. I asked gently. It already has. I let that hang. This was the moment they realized something crucial. I wasn't guessing. I wasn't grieving blindly. I had already moved. I met with compliance this morning. I said, audit initiated. Account access flagged. Biometric verification under review. My son stood abruptly. You involved the bank? And legal counsel, I added. The room felt smaller now. You're destroying this family, my daughter whispered. I looked at her carefully. No, I'm protecting it. Her eyes filled, but not with remorse, with anger. The anger of someone who believed entitlement had been interrupted. We were going to tell you, she said weakly. When? I asked. No answer, because there hadn't been a plan to tell me, only a plan to manage me. Slowly, strategically, the groundwork had already begun. Subtle comments about my stress, about my sleep, about simplifying responsibilities, a narrative forming. I saw it clearly now. The transfers were phase 1. Establish quiet financial influence. Phase 2 would have been documentation, perhaps questioning my capacity under the weight of loss. Present concern as care. Reframe control as protection. They had underestimated 2 things. Her preparation and my patience. I'm not calling the police tonight, I said calmly. Not yet. Relief flickered across their faces too quickly. But I continued. Every asset has now been secured. Multi-factor verification updated. Legal guardianship protections amended. And tomorrow morning, formal notice will be issued. My son stared at me. Formal notice of what? Revocation, I answered. From every financial structure you assumed you could influence. My daughter stood slowly. Her voice was hollow now. You're cutting us off. I'm cutting off access. I corrected. There's a difference. She looked at the USB drive as if it were evidence already entered into court. This didn't have to happen, she said. It didn't, I agreed. But it did. They left 20 minutes later. No hugs. No dramatics. just a controlled retreat. I locked the door behind them and stood alone in the quiet house. Grief was still there. It hadn't left, but something else had replaced helplessness. Control. The house felt different after they left. Not quieter, clearer. I stood in the living room for several minutes, listening to the silence settle back into place. The performance was over. The masks had slipped, and what remained was simple truth. I walked back into my study, closed the door, and sat at my desk. The USB drive was still in my hand. For a long moment, I just looked at it, not as evidence, not as leverage, but as her final act of protection. Even in her final months, she had seen what I refused to. She had protected me from something I never imagined would come from our own blood. At 9 the next morning, I met with my attorney. Everything moved quickly. Asset freezes, access restrictions, amendments to trust documents, digital authentication changes, emergency clauses activated. The structure we had built over decades was fortified in a single morning. My attorney didn't ask many questions. He didn't need to. The documentation spoke for itself. By noon, formal notices had been delivered electronically. By evening, my children had lost every point of financial leverage they thought they held. My daughter called once. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail filled with emotion, anger disguised as hurt. My son sent a short message. We were trying to help. I didn't respond to that either. Help doesn't happen in secret. Help doesn't require concealed transfers and unauthorized revisions. Help doesn't prepare narratives about someone's mental stability before they've even stumbled. The bank's compliance team completed their preliminary findings within 48 hours. The biometric log showed inconsistencies, timing gaps between access attempts and device confirmations. A forensic review of the spare laptop, which I reported missing, revealed mirror credential storage. They had copied authentication layers while visiting. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't accidental. It was methodical. That confirmation removed the final thread of doubt from my mind. Legal counsel drafted a letter offering one option, voluntary restitution, and signed acknowledgement of unauthorized access in exchange for avoiding criminal charges. I wasn't seeking prison sentences. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking clarity and consequence. They had 5 business days to respond. On the 4th day, my daughter's attorney replied. They would repay the transferred funds in full. They would relinquish any future claim to executive authority within our trust structures. They would sign the acknowledgement. The documents were signed 1 week later. No eye contact. No apologies. Just ink on paper and tension in the air. When it was done, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Just a clean line drawn where there had once been assumption. Weeks passed. Communication dwindled. Occasional text messages. Brief updates. Distance settled naturally between us. Not explosive, just firm. I adjusted estate plans accordingly. Charitable allocations expanded. Safeguards layered. The architecture of everything we built was now resistant to internal manipulation. Sometimes at night, I replay her final message. Not because I need the proof anymore, but because I need the reminder. Trust is sacred, but blind trust is fragile. She understood that before I did. She acted when I hesitated. Grief still visits. It sits in the empty chair across from me at dinner. It echoes in the quiet mornings. But alongside it now stands something steadier. Awareness. My children believed they were playing a long game. They believed timing and emotion would cloud judgment. They believed grief would make me weak. They were wrong. I didn't lose my wife and my judgment at the same time. And the stranger at her funeral? I never saw him again. No name. No contact, just a message delivered at exactly the right moment. I sometimes wonder if she arranged even that. It would not surprise me. What I know is this. She trusted me enough to leave the truth in my hands. And I honor that trust.